Good morning, good afternoons, and good evening to Miss and my fellow classmates. I am Alvin Chong. Today I'm going to present my individual assignments, which the topic of the rules and limitations of Paris agreements towards Singapore maritime sector. So moving on to the first part is the introductions of Paris agreements and also the Singapore. Paris Agreement is a landmark of international treaty adopted by the parties to the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. And Paris Agreement entered into the force on November 4th of 2016. The objective of Paris Agreement is under Articles 2, subsections ABCs. And Section A stated that is to hold or to limit the global average temperature to well below 2 Celsius degree, and the ideal of the temperature is 1.5 Celsius degrees. And Section B is stated is to increase the abilities of adverse impacts of climate change, fostering climate resilience, and also low emissions developments will not threaten food productions. And Section C, which is means that to ensure to making a financial flow consistently towards the low emissions developments. And Singapore, as we all know, that is stated in strategy locations in same as Malaysia, and so it's developed Singapore ports into one of the busiest ports globally in of the container ports, and also the world's largest bunkerings and transshipment hubs. So it's handling a large amount of containers and also fuels in the world as well. And Singapore is one of the first country who uh, agreed to align with Paris agreements towards the climate change and the climate issues. And by 2022, Singapore's MPA is the Maritime and Port Authorities of Singapore had commitments about the net zero fuels by 2030 and also the net zero emissions by 2050s, which Singapore target to achieve by the Pacific years. So Singapore has put some efforts towards to achieve the targets or the goals. The MPA is investing in green fuels, electrifications of harbors, craft, and also digital ports technologies to achieve the targets to complete the goals. And also ports of Singapore's and Jurong ports are aimed to achieve 60% or above of the reductions of the ports operations emissions by 2030 to achieve the net zero fuels by 2030s. And MPA is developing the TOS pods to become the first automatics and AI pods to fully run on electrics and low or zero carbon fuels or sources for their daily operations. The second part is the current issues of the Singapore maritime sectors, which I separate into three parts, which is the sea level rise, pollutions, including the air and water pollutions and oil pollutions, and also the ocean acidifications. So sea level rise is which Singapore is a low-lying island, which is the most concerned threats is the sea level rising. And Singapore estimate that the sea level around the country, around the Singapore, will rise up to 1.15 meter by the end of the century, which is the year 2100. And some of the studies also shows that if the sea level, if the sea added some couple storms and high tides, the sea level could rise to 5 meters, and which Singapore had 30% of the island's mass is less than 5 meter above the sea level, which lead to a direct risk or a direct critical threats towards the country. And Singapore, if Singapore did not take actions right away, the country by end of the century it will lost the 30% of the islands, the mass of it, which will harms the low coastal infrastructures, including ports, hubs, terminals, shipyards, and also others maritime infrastructures as well. And the pollutions, first is the air and water pollutions. Air and water pollution is which, as the Singapore is the world's largest bunkering and transshipment hubs and also the busiest ports, containers ports, which contributing heavily to the emissions and pollutions to the countries. And one of the studies shows that 42% of the air pollutions in the Southeast Asians shipping hotspots are contributed to marine fuel sold in Singapore, which means that Singapore's marine fuel sales is the 20% of the marine sales, which contribute the air and also the water pollution as well. And the water pollution is because of the marine fuel cells causing about 7.9 premature deaths per 100,000 people, which is the most highest in the global the global average is roughly the 10 times of the global average. And the last and also the oil pollutions, which is Singapore is in all the strategic locations is between the Strait of Malacca and also the South China Seas. So which uh, makes the Singapore sitting at one of the busiest sea roads in the world and creating a heavily traffic ship passing by and creating also lead to a large amount of incidents and also oil spill incidents as well. So the latest in the incidents of the oil spills, which is about the 2024 VEX Maxima oil spills. So this incident is about a Netherlands Dagger vessel that had a collisions with the Singapore bunker vessel in the Pasir Panjang terminals. So the collisions spilled around 400 tons of low sulfur fuel oils into the sea, which inside the terminals, and it's affected towards other places in Singapore as well. So later Singapore have to shut down several places to clean up the oil spills. And Singapore deployed 18 oil cleanup vessels and 800 workers to clean up the spills, and also 100 more than hundreds people voluntary to clean up as well. And the total cost of the cleanup service, which is the 72.5 millions of Singapore dollars. So the oceans acidifications, this is a critical and also a continuous growing issues in Singapore Sea as well. It's because Singapore face a double burdens of acidifications due to uh, dissolved organic carbons from the peatlands, which is from the Southeast Asia, particularly in Sumatra and other places, has spread a large amount of the DOC into the river, and end up in the Strait of Singapore, which studies from Nanyang Technological Universities show that 60 to 70% of the pit deliverable DOC is rapidly producing CO2 in the coastal oceans, which causing an issues for the marine ecosystems. And the DOC also absorb the sunlight that's required for the marine ecosystem as well. So making the low sunlight quality are available for the marine ecosystems in the Singapore maritime sector or Singapore seas. And moving on to chapter 3, which is the role of Paris agreements towards Singapore maritime sector. So first is the climate frameworks. Paris agreements is to create frameworks to the parties, to every parties that agree on the Paris agreement, is to uh, uh, provide the guidelines, the procedures, and to stipulating the modalities for the implementations of the agreements. And in Singapore, that which is the Maritime Singapore Decarbonization's Blueprint 2022, which including the zero carbon marine fuels, electricals, equipment, and also green financial. And the pollution controls. Paris agreements had a control on pollutions and also emissions which are related to each other, as Singapore is the largest bunkering hub. It's contributing 20% of the global marine fuels, and also what I mentioned earlier, it's the highest per capita death rates from the shipping's emissions. So Paris agreements will set up guidance or pollution control frameworks towards Singapore by launching several programs with Singapore to limit the emissions as well. And the last is the border of sustainability and compliance, which Paris agreements align with other international organizations like IMO to achieve the goals of each other, like to achieve the net zero emissions by 2050, and also achieve the net emissions, the net zero fuels by 2030. So, which is the Paris Agreement's roles towards Singapore's maritime sectors. And the fourth part, which is the limitations of Paris agreements, which is first is no explicites inclusions of shipping's emissions. This is meaning of Paris agreements did not have specific reference of shipping's emissions in the agreements, and creating gaps or regulations gaps towards the guidance and towards the standardized, and makes Singapore have to rely on other platforms other organizations, and also some strategies and some programs to fill up the gaps and to state out the guidance, the procedures, the ways on how to implement or how to limit, how to reduce the emissions and also pollutions in in port sectors, in shipping industry and the maritime sector as well. So second, which is the reliance on IMO. So Paris agreements rely on the IMO a lot as to regulate the greenhouse gas emissions from the international shippings. So IMO have the specific rules on applying to reduce the emissions, to reduce the pollutions in shipping sectors, which Paris agreements have the compliance and also have to align with IMO to achieve or to set up the frameworks towards the parties that agree on Paris agreements. So this as the IMO timelines are much slower than Paris agreements for the climax ambitions, and IMO is for the 2050 to achieve the net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and while the Paris agreements enforce every party to reduce the emissions annually, is which is to limit and to reduce the global temperature level by not reduce until the 2 Celsius degrees. So this relies on IMO, and this will create the low efficiency and also the low progress on the emissions on towards to reduce the pollution, also the emissions in the countries. So third is the soft law base, which Paris agreements is a voluntary or a domestic towards every parties, and which means that Singapore is voluntary to compliance with to align with the Paris agreements, and Singapore also can do not comply with the Paris agreements. And for Singapore, Singapore is a country that's heavily rely on their maritime sectors, their ports, their shippings trades to contribute their country's economies, their country's sales trades as well. So Singapore can have the opportunity to prioritize the competitiveness and hub status rather than the climate change and the decarbonizations. So which the progress depends heavily on voluntary leaderships, industrial readiness, and also the global corporations, and which means that Singapore can prioritize or can focus more on their status on their ports, their shipping sector, and rely on whether they can earn the revenue or not before thinking about the climate change issues, the emissions, and also pollutions. So moving for the last part, which is the recommendations. And the first is Paris agreements have to be explicit inclusions of shipping emissions. Paris agreement have to include specific guidance and rules for the shipping's emissions and the current omissions of the reference towards the shipping's reference the shipping's emission, sorry, to create the ambiguities. So second wish is to promote the regional collaborations, which have under the Article 6 of Paris Agreements. It stated that countries can collaborate through the carbon markets and cooperative approach to reduce the emissions. And only a few of the countries that's only using these strategies in their maritime sectors, including Singapore as well. So Paris Agreement should promote these strategies towards the maritime sector and to enforce the countries to implement and develop the specific methods, the strategies to achieve the main targets or the main goals of it, and boost the progress of the sustainabilities in countries' maritime sectors. So, like for examples, like Singapore and Malaysia, they can share their technologies, their carbon credits, and their best practices across the Asians, and also it can help to reduce the cost of overall the developments and researching, also boost the regional uh, re- resilience. And the third, which is to enhance the enforcements. As just now we already stated, the limitations of the Paris Agreements, which is the soft base, the soft law base. So Paris Agreement have to enhance their enforcements towards every parties, and have to have the legally enforcements as well to uh to boost or to implement the if to enforce every country, every parties to uh uh reduce their emissions and also reduce their pollutions in their countries. This will help the effectiveness and also the efficiency of the country as well. And and so for the main resources as the country of like relying on the maritime sectors, they cannot only focus on the revenue or the port status. They must include in the shipping's emissions and while developing their ports as well. So this could continuously to maintain their efficiency, their progress on towards the sustainabilities in maritime sectors. So the last part, which is to support the innovations and also financings. This part is which uh, reduce emissions or to decarbonizations needs a large amount of financial investments in research and developments. So including like have to develop low sulfur fuels or alternative fuels for vessel or biofuels for vessel, and also have to the zero emission equipments also, and about the electrifications of the harbor craft, and also have solar panels for infrastructures without using any high emissions of the resources. So Paris Agreement should like financially support the country in research and developments for the maritime sector emission solutions, and and also for somehow like Paris Agreement funds for the maritime projects could implement that the Singapore assistance initiative and accelerated the green fuels development in Singapore, that Singapore is really needed for the futures as the largest bunkering and also the 20% of the global fuel cells in the world. So this will ensuring the global maritime decarbonizations does not depropriate alternatively burden less developed the economies. So by that, I will end my individual assignments presentations. So and thank you.